The sprawling estate in La Jolla overlooked the Pacific Ocean, its manicured grounds stretching for acres behind imposing iron gates. At 62, billionaire tech entrepreneur Richard Blackwood had everything money could buy: luxury cars, private jets, and a reputation as one of the most successful but ruthless businessmen in San Diego. What he didn't have was peace, and what he was about to discover would change not just his life, but the life of a creature that had known nothing but fear and anger. Richard stood on his marble terrace, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the California coastline in shades of gold. His phone buzzed constantly with urgent messages from his investment firm, but for once he ignored them. Something felt different about this morning, though he couldn't explain what. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in his pristine neighborhood, a deep, aggressive bellowing that seemed to carry years of rage and pain. The sound was coming from the direction of his neighbor's property, an old ranch that had been abandoned for months after the previous owner's bankruptcy. Richard's security chief, Martinez, appeared at his side. "Sir, there's been a situation at the Henderson Ranch. Animal control is on their way, but there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" Richard asked, his business instincts immediately alert. "A bull, sir, massive one. The transport truck that was supposed to relocate the remaining livestock broke down yesterday. The animal has been trapped in a small pen without food or water for over 24 hours. He's aggressive doesn't begin to describe it." Richard frowned. He had no particular love for animals. His life had been too focused on acquisitions and mergers to leave room for sentimentality. But something about the desperation in that distant roar stirred an unexpected emotion. "Where exactly is this bull?" Richard asked. Martinez looked surprised by his employer's interest. "About half a mile east, sir, but I wouldn't recommend getting involved. Animal control says he's dangerous. They're bringing tranquilizer equipment." The bellowing grew louder, more frantic. Richard set down his coffee cup and made a decision that would have shocked his business associates. "Get the car." "Sir?" "I said get the car. I want to see this animal." 20 minutes later, Richard stood at the edge of the abandoned Henderson Ranch, staring at a scene that made his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades: genuine compassion. In a rusted metal pen barely large enough to contain him stood the largest bull Richard had ever seen. His coat was black as midnight, his shoulders massive with muscle. But his eyes held a rage that spoke of years of mistreatment. The bull's name was Michael, though Richard wouldn't learn this until later. Michael had been born on this ranch 15 years ago, raised by owners who saw him only as breeding stock and profit potential. He had never known a gentle touch, never experienced kindness. Every interaction with humans had involved cattle prods, ropes, and force. Michael's massive frame pressed against the metal bars of his prison, his hooves creating deep gouges in the dirt. When he saw Richard approaching, his nostrils flared and his head lowered in a threatening posture. This was a creature that had learned to survive through aggression because gentleness had never been an option. Richard stopped about 15 feet from the pen, close enough to see the intelligence burning in Michael's dark eyes, but far enough to avoid the range of those massive horns. Animal control officers were setting up their equipment nearby, preparing tranquilizer darts that would render the bull unconscious for transport. "How long has he been like this?" Richard asked Officer Thompson, who was loading the tranquilizer gun. "According to the records, this bull has been aggressive since he was young. Multiple incidents of charging handlers, destroying equipment. He's scheduled for..." Thompson paused diplomatically. "For what?" "Euthanization, sir. He's considered too dangerous to relocate." Richard felt something shift inside his chest. Here was a creature that had been shaped by cruelty, condemned to death for the very rage that had been beaten into him by years of harsh treatment. In Michael's fury, Richard saw something he recognized: the desperate anger of a being that had never been shown kindness. "What would it take to relocate him safely?" Richard asked. Officer Thompson looked at him with surprise. "Sir, this animal is extremely dangerous. Even sedated, he'd require specialized transport and a facility equipped to handle aggressive livestock." "That's not what I asked." "What would it take?" "Well," Thompson said slowly, "you'd need a custom transport trailer, veterinary supervision during the move, and a destination facility with proper containment. We're talking about significant expense for an animal that... An animal that what? Richard's voice carried the same sharp edge that had made him millions in boardroom negotiations. An animal that may never be rehabilitated, sir. Richard looked back at Michael, who was still pressed against the bars, breathing heavily, his massive form radiating fury and fear in equal measure. In that moment, the billionaire made a decision that would transform both their lives. Cancel the euthanization, Richard said quietly. I'm buying him. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Richard had believed about himself. He was a man who dealt in spreadsheets and profit margins, not in saving the lives of dangerous animals. But as he watched Michael's chest rise and fall with each labored breath, he knew there was no turning back. The custom livestock trailer arrived at Richard's La Jolla estate 3 days later, along with Dr. Amanda Torres, San Diego's most experienced large animal behaviorist. Richard had spared no expense. The trailer was equipped with padded walls, climate control, and cameras that would monitor Michael during the transport. Mr. Blackwood, I have to ask again, are you certain about this? Dr. Torres said as they watched the specialized loading process. This bull has a documented history of aggression. Even with the best facilities, rehabilitation isn't guaranteed. Richard watched through the trailer's camera feed as Michael paced in the confined space, his massive frame filling the custom-built compartment. The bull's eyes were wild, his breathing rapid and shallow, the behavior of an animal that had never learned to trust. Doctor, I've spent 40 years building companies from nothing. I don't accept that anything is impossible with the right approach, Richard replied. What would you need to give this animal the best chance? Dr. Torres consulted her tablet. First, we'd need to build a proper enclosure, not a pen, but a large paddock where he can move freely. Then we'd need to start with basic trust exercises. But Mr. Blackwood, this could take months, even years. And there's no guarantee. Build the paddock, Richard interrupted. Money is not a concern. Within a week, Richard's estate had been transformed. Where once stood manicured gardens now sat a 2-acre paddock with reinforced fencing, a climate-controlled shelter, and state-of-the-art security cameras. The construction alone had cost more than most people's homes. But Richard approached Michael's rehabilitation the same way he approached business acquisitions, with complete commitment and unlimited resources. The day Michael was released into his new environment, Richard stood at the fence line, watching the massive bull explore his surroundings. For the first time in his life, Michael had space to run, clean water that flowed continuously, and high-quality feed that appeared twice daily without any human demanding performance in return. But Michael remained suspicious. He stayed in the far corner of the paddock, as far from human contact as possible. When Richard approached the fence, the bull would lower his head and snort warnings that could be heard across the estate. Dr. Torres began her work slowly, carefully. Each morning she would enter the paddock with feed, moving with deliberate calm while speaking in low, soothing tones. Michael would retreat to his corner, watching her every movement with eyes that blazed with mistrust. He's testing us, Dr. Torres explained to Richard after the first week. Every interaction he's ever had with humans has involved force or pain. He's waiting for us to reveal our true intentions. Richard found himself visiting the paddock multiple times each day, drawn by something he couldn't quite explain. He would stand at the fence line, watching Michael pace or graze, studying the bull's behavior with the same intensity he had once reserved for market analysis. If you're amazed by this incredible transformation story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of second chances and the power of patience. Now, let's see what happens when Richard tries something no one expected. After 2 weeks of careful observation, Richard made a decision that shocked Dr. Torres. I want to try something different, he announced one morning. What did you have in mind? She asked cautiously. I want to sit with him. Mr. Blackwood, that's extremely dangerous. Michael hasn't shown any signs of accepting human proximity. If he charges, I'm not going to approach him, Richard said. I'm just going to sit in the paddock and let him get used to my presence. Despite Dr. Torres's protests, Richard was determined. That afternoon, he entered Michael's paddock, carrying nothing but a simple folding chair. He set it up near the gate, close enough to escape if necessary, but far enough into Michael's territory to make a statement. Michael's reaction was immediate and alarming. The massive bull charged toward Richard, stopping just 20 feet away, pawing the ground and bellowing a warning that echoed across the estate. Richard remained perfectly still, his heart pounding, but his expression calm. For 10 minutes, Michael displayed every aggressive behavior in his repertoire, charging, snorting, and positioning himself between Richard and the rest of the paddock. But Richard didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. He simply sat in his chair, hands folded in his lap, waiting. Finally, Michael stopped his demonstrations and retreated to his corner, but his eyes never left Richard. The billionaire sat in his chair for 2 hours that first day, saying nothing, making no demands, offering no threats. When he finally stood to leave, he moved slowly and deliberately, never turning his back on the bull. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," Dr. Torres said as Richard exited the paddock. "Maybe both," Richard replied. "But did you see what happened in the last 30 minutes? Dr. Torres consulted her notes. "He stopped displaying aggressive behavior and began grazing while keeping you in sight." "Exactly. For 30 minutes, Michael forgot to be afraid of me." That evening, Richard sat on his terrace overlooking the paddock, watching Michael move freely in the gathering dusk. For the first time in months, the constant buzz of his business responsibilities felt distant and unimportant. Something was happening in that paddock, something that couldn't be measured in profit margins or quarterly reports. Tomorrow he would return to his chair, and the day after that. However long it took, Richard was prepared to wait. Because in Michael's eyes, he had seen something that reminded him of his own younger self. A fierce intelligence trapped behind walls of defensive anger, waiting for someone to prove that gentleness existed in the world. 3 months had passed since Richard first sat in that folding chair within Michael's paddock, and the transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. What began as a daily ritual of patience had evolved into something neither man nor beast had expected, a genuine friendship that defied every expert opinion and professional recommendation. Each morning at 7 o'clock, Richard would enter the paddock with his chair, a thermos of coffee, and increasingly a sense of anticipation that had been missing from his life for decades. Michael no longer charged or displayed aggression. Instead, the massive bull would acknowledge Richard's arrival with a subtle head lift before continuing his morning routine of grazing and exploring his territory. Dr. Torres had documented every stage of the process with scientific precision, but even she admitted that what was happening between Richard and Michael transcended normal animal behavior patterns. "In 30 years of working with traumatized livestock, I've never seen anything quite like this," she confessed during one of her weekly progress reports. The breakthrough moment had come during the 6th week. Richard was sitting in his usual spot, reading emails on his tablet, when he noticed Michael had moved closer than ever before, perhaps 15 feet away. The bull wasn't grazing, he was simply standing there, watching Richard with an expression that seemed almost curious rather than wary. Slowly, Richard set down his tablet and spoke for the first time in weeks. "Good morning, Michael." The bull's ears twitched at the sound of his name, and something extraordinary happened. Michael took 3 deliberate steps closer, close enough that Richard could see the intricate patterns in his dark coat, the intelligence gleaming in his eyes, and, most remarkably, the absence of fear that had defined his existence for so many years. From that day forward, their morning sessions became conversations of sorts. Richard would speak quietly about his business dealings, his thoughts on the weather, or sometimes just his observations about Michael's behavior. The bull seemed to find comfort in the human voice that carried no threat, made no demands, and offered nothing but calm presence. "You know, Michael," Richard said one particularly beautiful San Diego morning, "I used to think success was measured in acquisitions and market dominance, but sitting here with you has taught me something different. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer is simply your time and patience." Michael had moved even closer over the weeks, now comfortable enough to graze within arm's reach of Richard's chair. The sight of a 2,000-pound bull peacefully sharing space with a human had become so routine that Richard's household staff no longer gathered to watch in amazement. But the real test came during the 4th month, when a severe thunderstorm struck San Diego with unusual intensity. Richard was in his study, monitoring the weather reports, when Martinez contacted him urgently. "Sir, the storm has damaged part of the paddock fencing. Michael could escape if he wanted to, but well, you should see this." Richard hurried to the paddock despite the driving rain and found Michael pressed against the undamaged section of fence closest to the house. The massive bull wasn't trying to escape through the gap in the fencing. Instead, he was calling out with low, rumbling sounds that were clearly directed toward the house. Without hesitation, Richard grabbed his rain jacket and entered the paddock. Michael immediately moved toward him, not with aggression, but with what could only be described as relief. For the first time in their relationship, the bull actively sought Richard's presence, finding comfort in the human who had never caused him pain. Richard stood in the pouring rain, one hand resting against Michael's massive shoulder, feeling the animal's calm breathing and steady heartbeat. "It's okay, big guy," he said softly. "The storm will pass. We're safe." They stood together for nearly an hour until the worst of the weather subsided, man and bull finding mutual comfort in each other's presence. When Richard finally returned to the house, he was soaked to the skin, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that surpassed any business victory he had ever achieved. Dr. Torres was astounded when she reviewed the security footage the next day. "Mr. Blackwood, what you've accomplished here challenges everything we know about aggressive animal rehabilitation. Michael has not only overcome his trauma, he's formed a genuine emotional bond with you." "What does that mean for his future?" Richard asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "It means he can never be relocated again. Michael has imprinted on you and this environment. Moving him now would undo years of progress and likely trigger a return to his previous aggressive behavior." Richard nodded, feeling a mixture of responsibility and unexpected joy. "Then he stays. This is his home now." As weeks turned into months, Michael's presence became an integral part of Richard's daily routine. The billionaire found himself adjusting board meetings and business trips to ensure he didn't miss their morning sessions. His executive assistants learned to block out paddock time in his schedule as non-negotiable appointments. The transformation wasn't limited to Michael. Richard's business associates began noticing changes in the man who had once been known for his ruthless negotiation tactics and impatient demands for immediate results. He became more thoughtful in his decision-making, more willing to invest time in long-term solutions rather than quick fixes. "Patience," Richard explained to his bewildered CFO during a particularly lengthy acquisition discussion, "is not just a virtue, it's a strategy. Some of the most valuable transformations require time and consistent effort rather than force." 1 year after Michael's arrival, Richard commissioned a bronze plaque that was installed near the paddock gate. It read simply, "Michael's Sanctuary, where patience meets trust." The ceremony was small, attended only by Dr. Torres, a few estate staff members, and of course Michael himself, who grazed peacefully nearby as if he understood the significance of the moment. That evening, as Richard sat on his terrace overlooking the paddock, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them together. He had set out to save a condemned bull, but in reality Michael had saved him. The angry, driven businessman who had measured worth only in financial terms had been replaced by someone who understood that the most valuable transformations couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. Michael stood in the center of his paddock, no longer the rage-filled creature who had been scheduled for euthanization. His coat gleamed in the setting sun, his posture relaxed and confident. When he noticed Richard watching, the massive bull approached the fence and extended his head over the rail, an invitation for the gentle touch that had once seemed impossible. Richard stood and walked to the fence, placing his hand on Michael's forehead. The bull's eyes, once blazing with fury and fear, now reflected contentment and trust. In that quiet moment, both man and beast understood that they had found something neither had known they were searching for, a connection that transcended species, wealth, and past trauma. "Thank you, Michael," Richard whispered, "for teaching me that some investments pay dividends that can't be measured in dollars." As the California sun set behind the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Richard and Michael stood together in comfortable silence. A millionaire who had learned the value of patience, and a bull who had discovered that not all humans bring pain. Their unlikely friendship had become a testament to the transformative power of gentleness, proving that even the most hardened hearts can learn to trust when treated with consistent kindness, and respect. The estate that had once been a monument to material success had become something far more valuable. A sanctuary where healing was possible, where fear could be replaced with trust, and where the simple act of showing up every day with patience and compassion could transform two lives in ways that neither had thought possible. A ruthless bull had never known such a gentle touch until this millionaire man changed everything.